Imagine this. It's the spring of 1829. A farmer is out in the fields near the Delaware-Maryland border. He's guiding his plow horse through the soil when suddenly, the ground collapses beneath the animal's hooves. The farmer rushes forward, expecting maybe a sinkhole, or a hollow log beneath the earth. But what he finds changes history. There, in the dirt, is a buried wooden chest. And inside, bones. Human bones. The skull is cracked, the skeleton yellow with age. It is the first clue to one of the most horrifying criminal enterprises in American history. And at the center of it all, a woman so feared, so violent, so merciless, her name became a curse whispered up and down the Delmarva Peninsula, Patty Cannon. Over the following weeks, authorities would dig up 7 bodies on this property, men, women, even children. But that was just the beginning. Patty Cannon's true body count was whispered to be more than 20. She wasn't just a kidnapper. She wasn't just a trafficker. She was a murderer. And she ran her empire of terror from one of the most unlikely places, a lonely tavern at a crossroads in the woods. This is part 1 of The Devil at Johnson's Crossroads. The story of America's most infamous female criminal, and the horrors she left buried in the ground. The discovery. When news of the farmer's discovery spread, local lawmen gathered to dig deeper. What they found made even hardened sheriffs pale. Bodies upon bodies, stacked in shallow graves and hidden under barns. Some skeletons bore marks of chains. Some skulls showed blunt force trauma. 3 of the bodies belonged to children. It was a crime scene so shocking that newspapers compared it to hell itself. But here's the question: who was Patty Cannon? And how did a woman in rural Delaware become the leader of the most feared kidnapping ring in American history? To answer that, we need to go back 3 decades before that farmer's plow struck wood. The perfect hiding place. The region known today as Reliance was then called Johnson's Crossroads. It was an eerie and isolated place, thick with pine woods and swampy lowlands. At night, fog rolled off the Nanticoke River, and the roads were little more than muddy paths twisting through the trees. What made Johnson's Crossroads so dangerous was its location. It sat exactly where Delaware met Maryland. If you committed a crime in one county, you could flee across the line before anyone could arrest you. It was a lawman's nightmare, and a criminal's paradise. Smugglers, thieves, and killers all used this no-man's land to disappear. And soon, it would become the headquarters of a woman who built an empire on human misery. The woman called Patty. Her real name was probably Lucretia Patricia Hanley. But history remembers her as Martha, Patty, Cannon. She arrived in Delaware around 1790, a tall, broad-shouldered woman with a voice deeper than most men's. Neighbors described her as 6 feet tall, with a temper that could silence a room. At first, she lived an ordinary life. She married a farmer named Jesse Cannon, had at least 1 daughter, and worked a small patch of land. Their house straddled the state line, a detail that would later prove very useful. But beneath the surface of that simple farm life, Patty was already learning the power of fear. And when Jesse Cannon died suddenly in 1826, some whispered she poisoned him. Patty no longer had to pretend. The market for flesh. To understand why Patty Cannon's crimes became so profitable, we need to look at America in the early 1800s. In 1808, Congress banned the importation of enslaved Africans. But that didn't end slavery. In fact, it created a booming market inside the country. The cotton gin had turned the Deep South into a gold mine. Plantations in Alabama, Mississippi, and Georgia were desperate for labor. And they were willing to pay more than $1,000 for a single enslaved worker. That's equal to tens of thousands of dollars today. The Delmarva Peninsula, with its large population of free black families, became a hunting ground. Free African Americans lived in constant fear. Their children could be kidnapped off the road, never to be seen again. Their homes could be invaded at night. And the law almost never helped. Free black people couldn't testify against white kidnappers in court. Their word was worthless in the eyes of the system. That was the world Patty Cannon stepped into. And she was about to exploit it with unmatched cruelty. Marriage into crime. Patty's transformation from farmer's wife to crime boss began with her daughter's marriages. Her daughter married a blacksmith named Henry Brereton. On the surface, he was a tradesman, shoeing horses, fixing plows. But in secret, he was a kidnapper. Brereton had a system. He traveled from farm to farm, pretending to look for work. Along the way, he noted which black families had young children or strong teenage sons. Then he'd return at night, armed with rope and violence. Sometimes he tricked families with promises of jobs for their children. Other times, he simply dragged victims from their homes. In 1811, Brereton was caught and thrown into jail in Georgetown, Delaware. But like many criminals of the time, he escaped within months. By then, he had already introduced his mother-in-law, Patty Cannon, to the trade. And she learned quickly. The mask falls away. After Jesse Cannon's death, Patty no longer needed to hide behind her husband's quiet reputation. She became the face of the operation. The tavern at Johnson's Crossroads, once a stopping point for travelers, became her base. Kidnappers, traffickers, and killers gathered under her roof, drinking, plotting, and dividing profits. Victims were chained in hidden rooms, waiting for wagons to take them south under cover of darkness. And anyone who threatened the operation, whether rival kidnappers, nosy neighbors, or even children, often ended up like the skeletons buried in her yard. The legend of Patty Cannon. By the early 1820s, Patty Cannon's name spread in whispers. Some said she could wrestle a grown man to the ground. Others swore she carried a pistol and a knife at all times, her skirts hiding more weapons than a soldier. But the most chilling rumors were the ones about her temper. They said she laughed while beating captives. That she killed babies rather than risk their crying giving her away. That she ordered executions without hesitation, her deep voice carrying commands like a general. History may never know exactly how many lives she destroyed. But what is certain is this: her empire thrived in the shadows, protected by corrupt officials, weak laws, and the cruel reality that society cared little for her victims. Until that spring morning in 1829, when a farmer's plowhorse struck wood. And the earth began giving up its secrets. To be continued. This is just the beginning of Patty Cannon's story. In part 2, we'll uncover how her kidnapping ring operated like a business empire, using rivers, hidden wagons, and corrupt lawmen to move dozens of victims at a time. Her story only grows darker from here. So, before you go, tell me in the comments, where are you listening from? Patty Cannon's crimes stretched from Delaware all the way to the Mississippi Delta. Her shadow touched many communities. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell so you don't miss part 2 of The Devil at Johnson's Crossroads. Because the buried skeletons were just the start. The Devil at Johnson's Crossroads. Part 2. Hook. In April of 1813, 2 men were led to the gallows in Georgetown, Delaware. Their crime: the cold-blooded murder of a slave trader named Rigel. The killers were Henry Brereton, Patty Cannon's own son-in-law, and a fellow outlaw named Joseph Griffith. But here's the terrifying part. The woman who set the trap, the woman whose tavern became the stage for Rigel's death, she walked away untouched. Her name was Patty Cannon. And with Rigel's murder, the Cannon family's empire of blood and misery had truly begun. The first documented murder. After escaping from jail in 1811, Henry Brereton didn't waste time. He reunited with Patty Cannon, and together with Joseph Griffith, they planned a robbery. Their target, Rigel, was a slave trader passing through the borderlands with cash in hand, between $3,000 and $5,000, money he intended to spend on buying enslaved people. To him, Cannon's Tavern looked like a safe place to rest. Food, drink, lodging, nothing out of the ordinary. But he was walking into a trap. Brereton and Griffith poured him drink after drink, waiting until he was stumbling drunk. When Rigel finally went to bed, they followed him to his room. Neighbors later recalled hearing shouting, then a gunshot ripping through the night. By morning, Rigel was dead. His body was buried in the dirt behind the tavern. His wagon, horses, and money were gone. The killers were eventually caught and hanged on April 13, 1813. But Patty, she slipped away without a single charge. It was the first murder tied to the Cannon name. And it set the tone for everything that would follow. Ruthless violence, hidden graves, and a woman always one step ahead of the law. The lesson learned. For most people, watching her son-in-law executed might have been a warning. For Patty Cannon, it was a lesson. She didn't see Brereton's capture as proof that crime didn't pay. She saw it as proof that crime required better organization. More planning, more protection, more power. And fate would soon hand her exactly that, when her daughter remarried a man named Joseph Johnson. Enter Joseph Johnson. Unlike Brereton, Johnson wasn't just a brute with a rope. He was a businessman. He had connections across the South. He understood transportation, markets, and buyers. Most importantly, he had money to invest. And he owned something that would transform their criminal operation into a true empire, a tavern built directly on the Delaware-Maryland state line. This tavern would become infamous as Joe Johnson's Tavern. The building itself straddled the border. One room sat in Delaware. Another sat in Maryland. That meant if Delaware sheriffs came knocking with a warrant, suspects could simply step across the floor into Maryland territory, and the lawmen were powerless. It was a genius setup. And under Patty Cannon's iron will, the tavern became much more than a roadside inn. A house of shadows. On the surface, Joe Johnson's Tavern looked ordinary. A bar, a common room, a few guest rooms upstairs for travelers. But beneath the floors lay the true heart of the operation. Cellars, tunnels, hidden chambers. Secret doors led to underground spaces designed to hold human beings. Rings were set into stone walls where chains could be fastened. Narrow ventilation shafts allowed air to flow in, but no sound to escape. Captives could be kept there for days, even weeks, before wagons carried them south under cover of night. The tavern was more than a business. It was a prison, a slave pen disguised as a roadside inn. And it became the headquarters for one of the most dangerous gangs in early American history. The Cannon-Johnson Gang. What made this gang unusual was its diversity. It wasn't just white outlaws. It wasn't just violent brutes. It was a carefully chosen mix of people, each with a role. White criminals like Henry Carr served as enforcers and guards. Mixed-race decoys, like John Purnell, described as yellow or mulatto, could move between communities, pretending to be either black or white depending on the situation. Even enslaved men were forced into service, ordered to help capture others. It was strategy. African American gang members could approach potential victims without raising suspicion, while white gang members handled negotiations with buyers down south. Purnell was one of the most dangerous. He used multiple identities, moving like a chameleon between worlds. He could pose as a free black man seeking work, or as a light-skinned white man doing business. He became the gang's scout, identifying which families were vulnerable, which children might fetch the highest prices. Expanding the web. By the 1820s, Patty Cannon's reach stretched far beyond Delaware. Their network extended from Pennsylvania all the way to Louisiana. Victims vanished from the streets of Philadelphia, only to resurface months later on plantations in Mississippi. One man who tried to stop them was Joseph Watson, the mayor of Philadelphia. A Quaker determined to protect free black citizens, Watson investigated the disappearances that terrified his city. In 1825 alone, he traced dozens of kidnappings back to the Cannon Gang. This was no longer opportunistic crime. It was a system. The gang kept intelligence on families. They knew who was struggling for work, who had children just reaching working age, who might be tempted by promises of employment. They weren't just predators, they were organized hunters. The victims. Among the most chilling testimonies is that of Lydia Smith, a 25-year-old free woman kidnapped in 1825. She described being held first in Paddy Cannon's own house, then moved to Johnson's Tavern. For 5 months, she remained in chains, hidden in the underground chambers, waiting to be sold south. Lydia's story is rare because she lived to tell it. Many others never did, and beneath the soil of Delaware and Maryland, shallow graves were filling. The reign of fear. By now, Paddy Cannon was more than a criminal. She was a legend. Travelers whispered her name like a curse. Parents warned their children never to wander the roads alone. She was described as towering, violent, impossible to intimidate. And with Joe Johnson at her side, her tavern became the very heart of America's reverse underground railroad, a system dedicated not to freedom, but to dragging free people back into chains. The same rivers and roads that carried escaping slaves north to freedom were used by Paddy Cannon to send her victims south into slavery. It was evil turned inside out. To be continued. But the story doesn't end here. Because as the 1820s went on, bodies kept disappearing. Families kept losing children, and whispers of the Cannon Gang spread as far as the Mississippi Delta. In Part 3, we'll explore how Paddy Cannon's empire grew so powerful that even lawmen were afraid to confront her, and how her crimes reached a scale that shocked the entire nation. So before you go, tell me in the comments, where are you listening from? Because Paddy Cannon's network stretched across states, and the fear of kidnapping haunted communities from Pennsylvania to Georgia. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the bell, and join me for Part 3 of The Devil at Johnson's Crossroads. Because the most terrifying part of Paddy Cannon's story is still ahead. Part 3. Collapse of the Cannon Empire. Lydia Smith's testimony was only one among many, but it provides a rare window into the lived experiences of those caught in Paddy Cannon's web. Her description of fear, deprivation, and the constant dread of being transported south mirrors what countless others endured in silence. What saved Smith was not chance, but the growing network of anti-slavery activists and reformers, men like Philadelphia's Mayor Joseph Watson, who were determined to disrupt the operations of organized kidnappers. For every Smith rescued, however, dozens more vanished into the depths of the Deep South, their names and stories erased except for scattered traces in court records, newspaper accounts, or the whispered memories of surviving kin. The mechanics of Cannon's enterprise were brutal in their efficiency. Victims, seized on isolated roads or lured by false promises of work, were immediately stripped of documentation proving their free status. Papers that could verify freedom were destroyed or forged into new identities suitable for sale. Captives were renamed, their histories rewritten to fit the narrative of being enslaved from birth. This system of enforced anonymity was central to the gang's success. A person robbed of both freedom and identity was far easier to commodify. The hidden chambers beneath Cannon's house and Johnson's Tavern were designed to erase individuality as well as liberty. Shackled in darkness, captives were reduced to a number, a unit of profit waiting to be processed. Psychological torment compounded the physical cruelty. Victims quickly realized resistance was futile. Those who protested too loudly or attempted escape often disappeared, never to be seen again. Survivors like Smith remembered not only the chains and hunger but also the silence of terror, punctuated by screams and gunshots that reminded them of the fate awaiting the defiant. Community complicity. The gang's activities were hardly invisible. Residents of the border counties whispered of strange wagons, late-night arrivals, and travelers who vanished after passing through Cannon's tavern. Yet silence reigned. In many cases, neighbors benefited directly. Local merchants accepted the gang's money without question. Farmers leased land to Cannon or Johnson and turned a blind eye to suspicious activity. Even law officers were compromised. Bribes and favors kept sheriffs and constables conveniently distracted. The indifference was not merely apathy, it reflected the racial order of the era. Free black people were widely regarded with suspicion, their word carrying little weight in legal proceedings. Complaints of kidnapping were often dismissed as lies or exaggerations. Only when white men, particularly wealthy slave traders, began to vanish did authorities take serious notice. The fate of the slave traders. Around 1820, a Georgian slave trader known alternately as Bell or Miller disappeared while traveling through Cannon's territory. He was carrying an enormous sum, estimated at $35,000, for the purchase of enslaved people. He was last seen at Cannon's tavern, and when his horse was later found in her possession, Cannon spun a tale that the trader had taken passage south by ship. Investigators, however, doubted her story. This disappearance was not an isolated incident but the beginning of a pattern. Cannon and her associates realized that eliminating rival traders brought dual rewards: the immediate profits of robbery and the long-term benefit of reduced competition. The risks were considerable. Unlike free black victims, white traders had financial backers, business partners, and legal protections that demanded answers when they vanished. But Cannon's growing arrogance convinced her that her system of concealment and bribery would continue to shield her. Her methods were direct and deadly. Traders were welcomed as fellow entrepreneurs, encouraged to drink heavily, and then robbed and killed. Their bodies were hidden in chests, shallow graves, or beneath outbuildings, while their money and enslaved cargo were absorbed into Cannon's expanding network. For years, these murders went unsolved, their perpetrators suspected but untouchable. Mounting pressure. By the mid-1820s, pressure from beyond the peninsula began to mount. Mayor Joseph Watson's tireless investigations linked dozens of disappearances in Philadelphia to Cannon's operation. Governor John Andrew Schultz of Pennsylvania coordinated with Southern officials to trace kidnapped citizens, many of whom had been transported hundreds of miles into bondage. Watson offered a $500 reward for information, a staggering sum at the time, equivalent to years of wages for laborers. This incentive began to fracture the wall of silence. Dissatisfied gang members, wary neighbors, and even former captives began whispering to authorities. Each fragment of testimony painted a larger picture, a multi-state conspiracy run from Cannon's doorstep. The gang responded with violence. Potential informants vanished or turned up dead. Cannon herself, increasingly paranoid, ordered killings of those she suspected of wavering loyalty. She had built an empire, with profits estimated at $50,000 annually, and she was determined to protect it at all costs. Yet this escalation only widened the circle of suspicion and created more opportunities for exposure. Cyrus James, the inside witness. The figure who would prove most crucial to the gang's unraveling was a young man named Cyrus James. Purchased by Cannon when he was only 7 years old, James grew up in her household, effectively enslaved but uniquely positioned to observe the inner workings of the operation. As a child, James had no choice but to serve as a decoy, luring unsuspecting free black people into captivity. As he matured, however, his awareness deepened. He realized he was being forced to betray people who shared his race, his vulnerability, and, in many cases, his innocence. This moral conflict gnawed at him, but Cannon's manipulation kept him silent. She alternated between treating him with favor and threatening him with brutal punishment or sail to the Deep South. Eventually, James's conscience overcame his fear. His testimony would later provide chilling details. Cannon personally murdering children, disposing of wounded captives rather than tending to them, and eliminating infants born in captivity because they represented a burden rather than profit. He admitted to helping bury bodies, revealing the systematic nature of Cannon's atrocities. James's willingness to speak destroyed the last vestiges of Cannon's protection. Unearthing the graves. In early 1829, fate intervened. A tenant farmer plowing newly cleared land on Cannon's property struck something unusual. His horse stumbled into soft ground, and upon investigation he uncovered a wooden chest. Inside were human bones, later identified as those of the long-missing Georgia slave trader. The chest was not a crude improvisation. It had been built precisely to contain a human body, its design suggesting years of practice in systematic disposal. The discovery shocked even hardened locals, confirming suspicions long whispered but never proven. Authorities descended on Cannon's property. Sheriff Joseph Houston of Sussex County, Delaware, coordinated with Maryland officials and Pennsylvania investigators. For the first time, multiple jurisdictions united to pursue the Cannon gang, recognizing the regional scale of their crimes. What followed was a grisly excavation. More graves were uncovered, each containing remains of Cannon's victims, men, women, and children alike. The soil of the Delmarva Peninsula yielded testimony more damning than any human witness could provide. The beginning of the end. The unearthing of the first body in 1829 marked the irreversible collapse of Paddy Cannon's empire. The revelations horrified the public. Newspapers across the mid-Atlantic carried lurid accounts of the discoveries, transforming Cannon from a shadowy rumor into a symbol of unchecked evil. The combination of Cyrus James's testimony, mounting witness statements, and physical evidence forced the hand of authorities who had long hesitated to act. What began as a small-town criminal enterprise had grown into a regional scandal that could no longer be ignored. The days of impunity were over. The graves on Cannon's land bore silent witness to decades of brutality, and the law, at last, was closing in. Part 4: Persistence. The master key to success. Let me tell you something important. The world does not reward the person who starts something. The world rewards the person who finishes it. Napoleon Hill called this quality persistence. He said persistence is the master key to turning desire into reality. Without persistence, every plan, every dream, every goal will fade away when difficulties come. So today, we are going to talk about persistence. What it is, why most people lose it, and how you can build it so strong that nothing can stop you. The nature of persistence. Think about it. Every great story of success is really a story of not giving up. Thomas Edison tested more than 10,000 materials before he found the right filament for the light bulb. Henry Ford failed in business 5 times before creating the automobile empire. Abraham Lincoln lost elections again and again, but he never quit. Eventually, he became one of the greatest presidents in American history. What was their secret? It was not genius. It was not luck. It was persistence. Napoleon Hill wrote that persistence is the sustained effort necessary to induce faith. That means persistence feeds your belief. The more you persist, the stronger your faith becomes. Why people quit. Most people start with excitement. They begin with fire in their hearts. But soon, life tests them. They face criticism from family and friends, financial difficulties, long hours of hard work with little results, doubt and fear whispering inside their minds. And here is the truth. Most people quit at the first sign of resistance. Why? Because persistence is painful. Persistence demands sacrifice. It requires a price, and most people are unwilling to pay it. But those who pay that price, the few who stay committed when everyone else stops, those are the people who rise to the top. The 4 enemies of persistence. Napoleon Hill described 4 enemies that destroy persistence. 1. Fear. Fear of failure, fear of criticism, fear of poverty. 2. Indecision, not knowing what to do, constantly changing plans. 3. Doubt, losing faith in yourself and your vision. 4. Excuses, telling yourself, I'll try later, it's too hard, or, maybe it's not for me. If you let these enemies win, your dream will die. But if you master them, nothing can stop you. The formula for building persistence. So how do you build persistence? Napoleon Hill gave us a formula. Let's break it down step by step. 1. A definite purpose backed by burning desire. You must know exactly what you want. Vague goals create weak persistence. Clear, definite goals create unbreakable persistence. Ask yourself, what do I want so badly that I am willing to suffer for it? 2. A definite plan of action. Dreams without plans lead nowhere. You need a plan, even if it is small and imperfect. Action creates momentum, and momentum builds persistence. 3. A mind closed to negativity. You must protect your mind. Avoid negative people. Reject discouraging words. Guard your focus like a soldier guards his post. 4. A mastermind alliance. Surround yourself with people who believe in you. Alone, persistence is hard. With allies, it becomes powerful. Napoleon Hill called this the mastermind. When you follow these 4 steps, your persistence becomes like steel. It bends, but it never breaks. Stories of persistence. Let me give you an example. When Colonel Sanders was 65 years old, he had nothing. Just a small social security check and a chicken recipe. He went door to door, restaurant to restaurant, offering his fried chicken recipe. He was rejected over 1,000 times. But he persisted. Finally, one restaurant said yes. That was the beginning of Kentucky Fried Chicken, a global empire. Think about that. A man rejected 1,000 times, at an age when most people retire, created a fortune because he refused to quit. That is the power of persistence. The emotional side of persistence. Persistence is not just about logic. It is about emotion. When your heart is on fire, you can keep moving forward even when your body is tired and your mind is screaming to stop. Napoleon Hill said that emotion, especially love, faith, and sex energy, fuels persistence. That means you must tie your goal to something deeply emotional. Don't just chase money. Chase freedom. Chase love for your family. Chase the dream of making a difference in the world. When your reason is strong, your persistence will be unstoppable. How to train persistence daily. Persistence is like a muscle. The more you train it, the stronger it becomes. Here are simple ways to build persistence every day. Finish small tasks. When you start something, finish it. Even if it is small. This trains your brain to complete what you begin. Set daily goals. Write down one thing you must accomplish each day. Complete it no matter what. Push past comfort. When you want to stop, do 5 more minutes. 5 more reps. 5 more calls. This small push builds discipline. Remind yourself of your why. Every morning, read your definite purpose out loud with emotion. Feel it. Believe it. Day by day, these habits create the steel of persistence in your character. The magic of persistence. Here's the secret Napoleon Hill revealed. Persistence turns failure into success. Failure is not permanent. It is only feedback. It is only a temporary defeat. But most people mistake temporary defeat for permanent failure. The persistent person does not. They see defeat as a teacher. They learn, adjust, and continue. That is why persistence is magic. It transforms rejection into redirection. It transforms obstacles into stepping stones. It transforms weakness into strength. Your challenge today. So here is your challenge. Ask yourself, where in my life have I been quitting too soon? Where have I allowed fear, doubt, or excuses to control me? What is one goal I will persist in, no matter how long it takes? Write it down. Commit to it. Promise yourself you will not stop until you achieve it. Final words. Remember this. The world does not stop the persistent man or woman. The world eventually surrenders to them. Napoleon Hill said, "There is no substitute for persistence. It cannot be replaced by anything else. Those who cultivate persistence will win." So, decide today. Will you be the person who quits at the first difficulty? Or will you be the person who persists until victory is yours? The choice is yours, and your future depends on it. Part 5: The Power of Persistence. How Winners Refuse to Quit. Life has a strange way of testing people. The moment you decide on a big dream, you will face obstacles, delays, disappointments, and even rejection. Most people give up when things get hard. But history shows us that those who succeed are not the smartest, the fastest, or even the most talented. They are the ones who refuse to quit. They are persistent. Napoleon Hill said it best. Persistence is to the character of man what carbon is to steel. Without persistence, your character is soft. With it, you become unbreakable. In this part, we are going to explore the power of persistence and why it separates winners from everyone else. Lesson 1: Why people quit too soon. Most people quit right before success is about to happen. They face temporary defeat and mistake it for permanent failure. But in reality, temporary defeat is just a test. It is life asking, do you really want this? Are you willing to fight for it? Hill tells the famous story of R.U. Darby and the gold mine. Darby and his uncle discovered gold in Colorado during the gold rush. They worked hard, and soon they struck a vein. Excited, they invested in equipment and kept digging. But after a few weeks, the gold disappeared. Discouraged, they quit and sold the mine to a junk man. That junk man brought in an engineer, who discovered that just 3 feet away from where Darby stopped digging, there was one of the richest gold veins in Colorado. Darby had quit 3 feet from gold. This story teaches us something powerful. Most people give up when they are closer to success than they think. The test is whether you keep going. Lesson 2: The Formula of Persistence. So, how do you develop persistence? Napoleon Hill gave us a clear formula. He said persistence is built through 4 key steps. 1. A definite purpose backed by burning desire. If you don't have a strong reason, you will quit. Purpose and desire fuel persistence. 2. A definite plan, expressed in continuous action. You can't just dream. You must have a clear plan and keep moving. 3. A mind closed tightly against negative influence. Don't listen to doubters or critics. Protect your vision. 4. A friendly alliance with people who encourage you. Surround yourself with those who support your mission. If you practice these 4, persistence becomes natural. Lesson 3: The Role of Faith in Persistence. Faith is the foundation of persistence. When you believe in your dream so strongly that you see it in your mind as already done, you will not quit. You will keep moving forward even when there is no evidence yet. Thomas Edison failed more than 10,000 times while trying to invent the electric light. But he did not call them failures. He said, "I have not failed. I have just found 10,000 ways that won't work." His persistence was rooted in faith. Faith in his ability, faith in his vision, faith in the idea that light could be harnessed. Today, the world is lit by his persistence. Lesson 4: Persistence turns defeat into victory. There is no such thing as permanent failure for the persistent person. Every setback, every rejection, every defeat is simply feedback. It is information that guides you closer to success. Hill shares another story about Henry Ford. When Ford announced he wanted to build the V8 engine, his engineers told him it was impossible. Ford refused to accept defeat. He told them, "Build it anyway." They worked for months with no success. Ford kept pushing. Eventually, after persistence and pressure, they figured it out, and the V8 engine revolutionized the automobile industry. This is what persistence does. It makes the impossible possible. Lesson 5: How to train persistence daily. Persistence is not something you are born with. It is a habit, built day by day. Here are simple practices to strengthen your persistence muscle. 1. Write your definite purpose daily. Remind yourself every morning why you are on this journey. 2. Take one step forward every day. Even if it's small, progress compounds. 3. Reject excuses. Excuses are the enemy of persistence. Replace "I can't" with "How can I?" 4. Embrace temporary defeat. When you fail, say to yourself, "This is part of the process. I am learning." 5. Surround yourself with believers. Just one encouraging voice can keep you going when you want to quit. Lesson 6: The silent power of refusal. Sometimes persistence looks like stubborn refusal. Refusal to give up. Refusal to settle. Refusal to listen to doubt. Hill said that persistence is nothing more than the power of will. You may not be the smartest, but if you have will, you will outlast the others. Look at Abraham Lincoln. He failed in business, lost elections, faced nervous breakdowns, and was defeated many times. Yet he refused to quit. His persistence carried him all the way to the White House, where he became one of America's greatest presidents. Lesson 7: The reward of persistence. Here is the truth. Every great reward in life is guarded by persistence. Wealth, success, freedom, happiness, these are not handed out easily. They must be earned through persistence. When you keep pushing, even when tired, even when discouraged, you are proving to life that you are serious. That is when doors open. That is when opportunities appear. Napoleon Hill said, "Those who can give up are of no use to themselves or to others. But those who persist, those who refuse to quit, become leaders, creators, and builders of empires." Final word. Persistence is the magic that turns failure into success. It is the reason why some men and women rise to greatness while others fall away. So ask yourself, do I have persistence? Do I push forward when things get hard, or do I quit? Remember the lesson of Darby: don't stop 3 feet from gold. Remember Edison: 10,000 failures did not stop him. Remember Ford: his persistence built an industry. Remember Lincoln: his persistence carried him to the highest office in the land. You don't need to be a genius. You don't need to be rich. You don't need to be lucky. You need persistence. Because persistence always wins. The Millfield Courthouse Murders. Part 6: The Blood Ledger. The town of Millfield had grown quiet, unnaturally quiet, after the night screams that had shaken the courthouse. People whispered in the streets, but no one dared speak openly. Even the bravest men who once laughed at ghost stories now crossed themselves when passing the courthouse steps. Judge Harrison Crawford still held his head high. He wore his dark coat and polished boots, as though the world was perfectly in order. But those close to him noticed the tremor in his hand when he signed papers, and the way his eyes seemed to avoid the courthouse basement door. Sheriff Tom Everett, however, could not stay silent. He had been plagued with nightmares of the prisoners who had vanished. In his dreams, they appeared in chains, their faces pale and mouths wide open as though screaming without sound. One evening, after too much whiskey, he confessed to Reverend Miller. "Reverend," he muttered, his eyes bloodshot, "something foul is festering in that courthouse. Men go in, and they don't come back out. Judge Crawford says they've been transferred, but I've seen their belongings left behind. Boots, letters from wives, even a Bible." The Reverend leaned forward. "You think the judge is lying?" The sheriff swallowed hard. "I think the judge is keeping a ledger, and it's written in blood." The Reverend, stern but fearful, decided to act. Late one night, when a storm rolled across East Texas, he took his lantern and went to the courthouse. Rain pounded on the roof, thunder shook the walls, and the streets were empty. The doors of the courthouse groaned as he pushed them open. The air inside smelled of damp wood, smoke, and something coppery, something like blood. The Reverend's lantern light flickered across the grand hallway, past portraits of stern-faced lawmakers, and toward the stairwell leading down. His breath quickened. Everyone in Millfield knew the basement was forbidden, yet something pulled him there. Step by step, he descended into the darkness, the storm echoing above him. At the bottom, he found a heavy iron door, locked. But beside it was a wooden desk, and on that desk lay a leather-bound book. Its cover was cracked and stained, as though it had been splashed with something that had dried dark. The Reverend opened it. His hand shook as his eyes scanned the names. Page after page was filled with prisoners' names, but instead of release dates, each entry ended with a red mark. Some marks were crosses. Some were circles. Others were crude drawings of knives or shackles. And then, halfway through the book, the Reverend froze. The ink had changed. No longer black, but deep red. Thick. The names were written in blood. Dash dash dash. The storm roared outside, and suddenly the basement air grew colder. The Reverend felt something behind him. Slowly, he turned. In the shadows, something moved. It was a figure, shackled and broken, face half decayed, skin hanging loose like wet cloth. Its eyes were hollow, and its mouth opened wide as if to scream, but only a gurgling whisper came. The Reverend stumbled back, clutching his lantern. In God's name, more figures stepped from the shadows. Shackled men, the missing prisoners. Their bodies twisted, their hands reaching. Not alive, not dead, something caught in between. The Reverend dropped the ledger in terror. The book hit the stone floor with a sickening thud. At once, the basement filled with whispers. They slithered along the walls, echoing like voices from the grave. Judge, judge, judge. Dash dash dash. The Reverend bolted up the stairs, lantern nearly extinguished. He burst out into the storm, clutching his chest. He didn't stop until he reached the sheriff's house. Sheriff Everett opened the door, startled. Reverend, what in God's name? The Reverend collapsed into a chair, drenched and trembling. I saw them, he whispered. The prisoners, they're still there. Shackled, rotting, but alive in some way no man should be. That judge, he's not sending them anywhere. He's keeping their souls trapped. The sheriff paled. And the ledger? It's true, the Reverend said, his eyes wild. Every name is written. Every man who vanished. Written in blood. For the first time, the sheriff felt true dread. He poured the Reverend a drink, his own hands shaking. If this gets out, the whole town will fall apart. The Reverend leaned close. If it doesn't get out, our souls will be next. Dash dash dash. But word always finds a way. Within days, rumors spread. People spoke of the blood ledger, of whispers in the basement, of prisoners seen walking the courthouse halls at night. A farmer swore he saw one of the missing men standing in his field at dawn, chains dragging in the dirt, before vanishing into mist. Fear gripped Millfield tighter than ever. And Judge Crawford, he smiled more than ever. He shook hands in the street, gave bold speeches about law and order, and reminded folks of God's justice. But behind closed doors, he kept the ledger near. He traced the names with his fingers. And sometimes, he added new ones. Not just prisoners. Townsfolk. Dash dash dash. One evening, the sheriff was called to the courthouse again. Judge Crawford sat in his chambers, the ledger on his desk, open wide. Sheriff, the judge said calmly, there are those who whisper against me. There are those who do not respect order. You must help me keep this town in line. The sheriff's eyes flicked to the ledger. On the fresh page, written in crimson, he saw a new name. His own, Tom Everett. His blood ran cold. Dash dash dash. Outside, the storm began again. And from beneath the courthouse, faintly, came the sound of chains dragging across stone. The Millfield Courthouse Murders. Part 7, Shadows on the Gallows. The courthouse square of Millfield, once the pride of the town, had grown sickly quiet. The windows of the brick building stared blankly at the street, their panes like watchful eyes, reflecting only suspicion and dread. A week had passed since the last prisoner vanished. A week since Judge Harrison Crawford had slammed his gavel down and sworn that order would be restored. But order was slipping away like water through cracked stone. The townsfolk whispered of curses, of devils, of the dead not resting beneath the courthouse gallows. Mothers dragged their children indoors before sunset. Men walked in pairs, rifles clutched tight even when fetching water from the well. Fear was not whispered anymore, it roared, rattling inside every locked door. Inside the courthouse, the judge's candle burned late into the night. His chambers smelled of sweat and whiskey. Books lay open, their pages smeared with ink where his hand had trembled. He told himself he was still in control. Yet each night, when the halls grew still, he heard it. The dragging of chains, the scrape of boots against stone, the echo of voices that should have been silenced at the gallows. That Friday, the sheriff knocked on his door. Sheriff Abel Turner, broad-shouldered but weary-eyed, stood with his hat in hand. "Judge," he said, his voice gravelly. "We need to talk." Crawford's eyes narrowed. "Speak then." The sheriff hesitated before lowering his voice. "The townsfolk, they've found things in the marshland." Crawford's gavel-like voice barked back, "What things?" The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. "Bones. Fresh ones. Shackles still on the wrists. Not buried proper, just scattered like some beast dragged 'em." The judge gripped his desk until the wood creaked. He wanted to shout that it was nonsense, that the sheriff was chasing shadows. But he could see it in Turner's eyes, the man wasn't lying. "Keep it quiet," Crawford snapped. "Do you understand? Not a word to the people. If panic takes root, we'll never tear it out." The sheriff frowned. "And when the families ask? When the preachers start demanding answers?" The judge leaned forward, his face pale and hard. "Then tell them justice is at work. That the law does not bend. Leave the rest to me." That night, Crawford walked the courthouse halls alone. His footsteps echoed, though at times it sounded as though another set followed close behind. He passed the gallows in the central chamber, the thick rope swaying though no breeze touched it. He stopped at the basement door, the place where the prisoners were kept before trial. The iron handle was cold in his hand. Too cold. He opened it. The stairwell descended into blackness. His candlelight flickered, throwing jagged shadows along the stone walls. The smell hit him first, rot, damp earth, and something sour like old blood. He pressed on, his jaw clenched. At the bottom, the cells stretched before him, iron bars like ribs of a giant carcass. But the cells were empty. Every last one. Shackles dangled from the walls, their clasps broken, twisted as if torn apart by inhuman force. And then he saw it. On the far wall, carved deep into the stone, was a mark. A crude symbol, like a circle with jagged lines cutting through it. Fresh, the edges white with powder where the stone had been gouged. Beneath it, a smear of blood, still wet. The judge's breath caught in his throat. From the darkness behind him came a whisper. Low, guttural, broken like it crawled from a throat that no longer lived. "Crawford, we are not done." The candle snuffed itself out. The next morning, the judge sat pale and trembling in his chamber. He hadn't slept. His wig lay discarded, his face streaked with sweat. The sheriff entered, stiff with unease. "Judge, folks are demanding answers. They're sayin' the dead are walkin'. That you knew all along." Crawford slammed his fist against the table. "Superstition, nothing more. The law is all that holds this town together. Do you want it to fall into chaos?" But even as he spoke, his voice cracked. The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "I seen things too, Judge. Don't call me a fool." The judge waved him off, though his hand shook. "Do your duty, Abel. Keep them calm. Leave the rest to me." When the sheriff left, Crawford poured himself another glass of whiskey. His hands trembled so violently the glass nearly slipped. He muttered to himself, convincing himself, lying to himself. It's in their heads. It's in my head. Nothing more. But deep inside, he knew the truth. Something had been unleashed, and it wore the faces of the men he had condemned. That evening, the church bell rang out though no one had pulled the rope. Its hollow toll spread across Millfield, chilling every spine. The townsfolk gathered in the square, eyes wide, voices trembling. And there, at the steps of the courthouse, appeared a figure. It was shackled, its clothes torn, its face pale, lips cracked and dry. The people gasped, some falling to their knees. Jonas Whitby, someone whispered. But Whitby had been hanged 3 weeks before. His body should have been buried. The man staggered forward, eyes glazed white, chains dragging across the dirt. His mouth opened, a rattling sound spilling out, neither word nor breath. The crowd screamed, mothers clutched children, men raised rifles, but none dared fire. From the courthouse doorway, Judge Crawford appeared. His face turned gray when his eyes met the figure. For he knew this man. He had sentenced him with his own hand. He had watched him swing. And yet, here Whitby stood. The figure raised one chained hand and pointed at the judge. The sound that came next was not human. A shriek, a howl, a roar of the grave itself. The people fled in terror. But Crawford could not move. He could only stand there, trembling, as the dead man pointed straight at him, condemning the judge as he had condemned so many others. That night, Millfield was no longer a town of whispers. It was a town of screams. Doors barred, windows shattered, prayers muttered in trembling voices. The dead had risen, and they bore shackles of the courthouse. And Judge Crawford, alone in his chamber, could hear them at the walls. Scraping, knocking, calling his name. The law was no longer in his hands. Something darker now ruled Millfield. And the judge knew, this was only the beginning. End of part 7. Do you want me to make part 8 even darker, with the dead prisoners hunting the townsfolk one by one, while Judge Crawford slowly loses his sanity? Part 8. The fire in the chapel. The night after the last strange discovery was darker than usual. Thick clouds swallowed the moon, and a restless wind blew through the dead trees surrounding the chapel. For weeks now, fear had taken root in the hearts of the villagers. Whispers spread from cabin to cabin, whispers of shadows moving through the cornfields, of screams echoing near the swamp, and of the Whitworth family's midnight gatherings inside their chapel. But on this night, something changed. The people of Angel's Rest had decided they had seen enough. The gathering at the edge of the woods. By lantern light, a group of 20 men and women gathered at the edge of the swamp path. They came armed with whatever they could carry, axes, pitchforks, muskets left over from the war. At their center stood Elijah Ward, the blacksmith, whose wife had gone missing 2 months earlier. He raised his lantern, his face hard with rage. "They've taken our children, our wives, our brothers," he said. "And we've been too afraid to fight back. No more. Tonight, we end it." The crowd murmured, fear thick in their voices, but their anger burned hotter. They had all lost someone. They had all heard the screams from inside the chapel when the swamp fog rolled in. And together, they were ready to face the Whitworths. Inside the chapel. Meanwhile, inside the chapel itself, the Whitworth family was preparing for their midnight ritual. Judge Whitworth stood at the altar, his hands raised, whispering in a language no villager could understand. His wife, Eleanor, arranged candles around the room, each flame casting twisted shadows on the rotting wooden walls. The pews were empty except for the hooded followers, pale, hollow-eyed people who had once been neighbors, now loyal to the Whitworth's unholy cause. At the very center of the chapel lay a crude wooden table. On it, bound in rope, was a young boy no older than 12. His terrified eyes darted from face to face, his muffled cries lost beneath the chanting. The judge lifted a knife. "Tonight, we feed the swamp," he intoned. "Tonight, we renew the covenant." The villagers attack. Before the blade could fall, the chapel doors burst open with a crash. Elijah Ward and the villagers stormed inside, their lanterns and torches flooding the room with light. "Enough!" Elijah roared. "Release the boy!" Chaos erupted. Followers screamed, scattering into the corners. The Whitworths did not move. The judge only smiled, lowering the knife slowly. "You come with fire and fury," he said calmly, "but you do not understand what you are fighting." Elijah raised his musket and fired. The shot rang out, echoing through the swamp. The bullet struck Judge Whitworth square in the chest. But instead of falling, the judge stood tall. He touched the hole in his coat, and when he lifted his hand, not blood but black, tar-like fluid oozed from the wound. The villagers froze. The judge's smile widened. The flames catch. Panic spread like wildfire. A lantern shattered against the floor, spilling oil across the warped wooden boards. Flames licked up the walls, devouring the dried wood. Smoke filled the chapel. The followers wailed, some clawing at the windows, others collapsing in prayer. Eleanor Whitworth shrieked, her voice inhuman, as her body twisted and bent in unnatural ways. Her eyes glowed like embers as she lunged at one of the villagers, tearing into him with strength no woman should have possessed. The judge raised his arms high, chanting louder, his voice rising above the screams and crackling fire. The boy on the table writhed against his ropes as Elijah fought to reach him. Escape. Through smoke and chaos, Elijah hacked at the ropes with his axe and pulled the boy free. Together they stumbled toward the door, coughing, eyes stinging from the smoke. Behind them, villagers battled the Whitworths' followers, but the fire was spreading too quickly. "Out! Everyone out!" Elijah shouted. One by one, the villagers fled into the swamp air, dragging the wounded with them. The chapel burned hotter and hotter, its steeple catching like a torch. The judge remained inside, his voice booming even as the flames engulfed him. "You cannot kill what is eternal," he roared. The roof collapsed with a thunderous crash. Sparks rained down into the swamp. The screams of the Whitworths mingled with the roar of fire until at last the chapel was nothing more than a blazing skeleton against the night. The silence after. The villagers gathered at the edge of the swamp, watching as the flames consumed the chapel. Some wept, some prayed. Elijah stood with the boy at his side, his face streaked with ash. "It's over," someone whispered. But Elijah wasn't so sure. He remembered the judge's black blood, the way he had stood unharmed by the musket shot. He remembered his words, "You cannot kill what is eternal." And then he noticed something, a shadow moving in the swamp fog. The thing in the swamp. As the last of the chapel collapsed, a terrible sound rose from the swamp itself. It was a deep, guttural groan, as if the earth were alive and angry. The water rippled violently. Out of the fog, shapes began to move, twisted figures, half human, half swamp, their eyes glowing faintly in the firelight. The villagers froze, torches trembling in their hands. The judge had been right. Burning the chapel had not destroyed the evil. It had only awakened something older, something buried deep in the swamp. One by one, the shapes stepped closer, their bodies dripping with black sludge. A smell of rot filled the air. The villagers backed away, clutching their children. Elijah raised his axe again, though his arms shook. "Run!" he shouted. Back to the village. The people scattered into the trees, vanishing into the night. The swamp groaned louder, as if laughing. The last sight, as Elijah was the last to leave, he turned once more to the burning ruins of the chapel. Through the flames, he thought he saw a figure still standing at the altar, the judge himself, untouched by fire, his eyes glowing like coals, his lips moving in silent prayer. And then the roof caved in completely, swallowing the figure in fire and smoke. Elijah ran, the boy clutched to his chest, his heart pounding with the knowledge that the true horror was only just beginning. The chapel was gone, but the swamp was alive. And it was hungry. Part 9: The Gathering Shadows. The year was drawing to a close in Millfield, yet the shadows around the courthouse only seemed to deepen. The townsfolk tried to go about their lives as if nothing was wrong, but everyone felt the weight of something unseen pressing on their hearts. The missing prisoners were no longer spoken of openly. Their names had become like curses, best left unsaid, lest you invite their fate. Yet at night, in the stillness, the people whispered. They whispered of screams carried on the wind, of lanterns glowing in the courthouse long after midnight, and of Judge Crawford's booming voice echoing when no one should have been inside. Sheriff Douglas tried to keep order, but even he no longer entered the courthouse without trembling. He had seen too much. He had heard things that no lawman should ever hear. And worst of all, he knew the judge was hiding something. One night, the sheriff was awakened by frantic knocking at his door. Standing there was young Matthew Whitfield, the blacksmith's son. His eyes were wild, his skin pale as bone. "They're back," he whispered, shaking. "I saw them. The prisoners. They were walking down the road, but they weren't alive." Sheriff Douglas grabbed his coat and lantern and followed Matthew to the old road leading past the courthouse. The moon was full, casting a pale light on the fields. And there, in the distance, they saw them, figures shuffling slowly across the dirt road. There were 4 of them. Their clothes were torn, stained with old blood. Their faces were sunken, pale, lifeless. Yet they moved with purpose. And each one dragged chains across the ground, the metal scraping like knives on stone. Matthew clutched the sheriff's arm. "I swear it, sir. That's James Miller, the one who robbed the store last spring. And the other's Thomas Kane. They were supposed to be locked inside that courthouse." But Sheriff Douglas already knew. His heart hammered in his chest. He had buried Thomas Kane's file weeks ago, after the judge told him the man had been transferred. But there had been no transfer. The sheriff raised his lantern and stepped closer. The figures turned their heads. Their eyes glowed faintly, a sickly yellow, as if fire burned inside rotting sockets. Then, one by one, they opened their mouths, and a deep, guttural moan rolled across the fields. The sheriff staggered back. "Lord have mercy." The figures didn't follow. They only stood and stared, until a gust of wind blew out the sheriff's lantern. When the light returned, they were gone. Dash dash dash. The next morning, the town was in uproar. Word of the walking prisoners spread like wildfire. Some people locked themselves inside their homes. Others gathered rifles and torches, ready to storm the courthouse. But Judge Crawford appeared on the steps before they could act. "Good people of Millfield," he bellowed, his voice calm yet commanding. "Do not let fear twist your hearts. These rumors of the dead walking are nothing but drunken tales. The prisoners are gone, yes, but gone to another county. Do not believe otherwise." But the townsfolk no longer trusted him. They saw how pale his skin looked, how the veins around his eyes seemed darker than before. And when he turned away, a woman swore she saw his shadow move in the opposite direction of his body. That night, the sheriff confronted him in his chambers. "Judge Crawford, I've kept quiet as long as I could," the sheriff growled. "But I know you've been hiding the truth. The prisoners are dead, and yet they walk. I've seen them with my own eyes. What devil's work is going on inside this courthouse?" The judge looked up from his papers, his face expressionless. "You are tired, Sheriff. Too many nights without sleep. You imagine things. Don't lie to me." Douglas slammed his fist on the desk. "If you don't speak plain, I'll bring the townsfolk here myself. They'll tear this place apart stone by stone until the truth comes out." For the first time, the judge's mask slipped. His lips curled into a faint, cold smile. "You think you want the truth," Crawford said softly, "but you do not. The truth would unravel your mind. It would drive this town into madness. I alone bear the burden, Sheriff. Go home, before you lose what little sanity you still cling to." Douglas felt a chill run down his spine. He backed away, but before he left, he swore under his breath, "If I catch you in another lie, Judge, I'll drag you down myself." 2 nights later, the courthouse bells rang on their own at midnight. The townsfolk gathered in fear, staring at the dark silhouette of the building against the moonlight. No one dared to enter. But from within, they heard chanting. Low, deep voices repeating words in a language no one recognized. Then came the screams. They weren't the screams of prisoners. They were louder, more piercing, as if something older than man itself cried out. Windows rattled, dogs howled, and when the noise stopped, silence fell heavier than ever before. By morning, the ground around the courthouse was scorched, as if fire had licked it. Strange symbols, drawn in ash, covered the steps. The people demanded answers, but the judge was nowhere to be found. His chambers were empty. Only one thing was left behind, a book. Its cover was bound in cracked leather, its pages filled with symbols like those on the courthouse steps. Sheriff Douglas picked it up, and though he did not understand the words, he felt them burning into his mind. That night, he dreamed of the prisoners again. But this time, there were more than 4. There were dozens, maybe hundreds, all chained together, their faces blank, their mouths open in silent screams. And at the center of them stood Judge Crawford, his eyes glowing yellow, his voice whispering a single phrase. "The trial is never over." The town of Millfield was unraveling. People fled in the night, leaving behind farms and homes. Those who stayed lived in constant dread. They barred their doors, whispered prayers, and dared not look out their windows after dark. But the courthouse still stood. Its shadow stretched farther than it should, reaching across the town like a grasping hand. And though the judge was gone, the people swore they still heard him. Sometimes, at dawn, his voice would boom across the square, reading out names no one recognized. Names of the lost, names of the dead. Sheriff Douglas knew the end was near. He could feel it. The book burned in his desk drawer, tempting him each night with whispers of knowledge. And though he wanted to destroy it, some part of him knew he might need it. Because whatever had been unleashed in Millfield was not finished. The walking prisoners were only the beginning. End of part 9. Here is part 10, final part, of your horrible historical story, written in simple, engaging American English for YouTube storytelling. Around 1,000 words. It includes a call to action at the end. The Millfield Courthouse Murders, Part 10, final part. The year was 1867, and the small East Texas town of Millfield had already been scarred by secrets, whispers, and disappearances. But as the final chapter of this terrible history unfolded, the truth proved far more terrifying than anyone had imagined. Judge Harrison Crawford's courthouse stood in silence. Its walls were cracked, its roof sagging, and its windows filmed over with grime. For weeks, no trials had been held, no justice carried out. The townsfolk avoided the building altogether, claiming they could hear faint screams echoing from within after dark. But tonight, the silence broke. Sheriff Edwin Pike, weary and haunted from months of investigating, returned to the courthouse with lantern in hand. He wasn't alone. 2 deputies followed, along with Reverend Cole, the town's pastor who had begged to be present. Pike's face was pale and determined. This would be their last attempt to uncover what Judge Crawford had hidden. The courthouse doors groaned as they pushed them open. A rush of cold, stale air poured out, carrying with it the stench of rotten something sharper, something like iron and blood. Inside, the wooden benches were covered in dust. The judge's high seat loomed in the shadows, empty but still commanding. Reverend Cole muttered a prayer, clutching his Bible tight. Sheriff Pike raised the lantern. "We finish this tonight," he whispered. The group moved down the main aisle, their boots echoing against the warped floorboards. Pike stopped near the judge's bench and tapped his boot against the wood. hollow. Just as he suspected. "Pry it open," he ordered. The deputies set to work, crowbars groaning as nails ripped free. The floorboards lifted, and beneath them lay a staircase descending into the earth. Cold air seeped up from the darkness, carrying with it the unmistakable smell of death. Reverend Cole hesitated. This is unholy ground. Hell itself could be down there, Pike said firmly. "But we're going." Lantern light flickered as they descended. The stairs were damp, slimy with mold. At the bottom stretched a narrow corridor, its walls made of brick and earth. Chains hung from iron hooks. Scraps of torn clothing lay scattered across the ground. And then, the cells. 7 iron cages lined the corridor, their doors locked with heavy latches. Inside each, skeletal remains slumped against the walls. Men and women who had once stood trial in Millfield now rotted in silence. Some still had ropes around their necks, as though they'd been dragged here mid-execution. One deputy gagged. Reverend Cole wept softly. Pike gritted his teeth. He didn't sentence them to prison. He brought them here. As they moved deeper, something shifted in the shadows. A faint scratching, like nails against stone. The lantern revealed a figure hunched in the farthest cell. Not bones, flesh. A prisoner still alive. The man's face was hollow, his skin stretched tight over his skull. His eyes burned with a wild, animal fear. When he saw them, he rushed the bars, screaming, "Get me out! For God's sake, get me out!" The deputies rushed to unlock the cage, but the man shook his head violently. No, you don't understand." His voice cracked with madness. "He's still here. He feeds them to the earth." "Who?" Pike demanded. "Judge Crawford." The man shrieked. "He doesn't just kill them, he gives them to something below us. He said the ground must be fed." The prisoner collapsed, sobbing uncontrollably. Before anyone could respond, the ground beneath them trembled. A low groan, like something massive stirring deep in the earth, rumbled through the corridor. Dust rained from the ceiling. The lantern flame flickered wildly. And then they heard it, the slow creak of boots on the stairs above. Sheriff Pike turned sharply, his pistol raised. From the darkness at the top of the staircase came a tall, gaunt figure. His black judge's robe hung in tatters, his face pale as chalk, his eyes sunken but glowing faintly in the lamplight. "Judge Harrison Crawford, gentlemen," his voice drawled, cold and steady. "And Reverend." He descended the stairs with unnatural calm, his boots never missing a step. "You trespass where judgment has already been rendered." Reverend Cole raised his Bible. "This is blasphemy. You murdered these people." Crawford's lips curved into a thin smile. "Murder? No. Justice. They were guilty. The law demanded punishment. But the earth demanded more." The ground rumbled again, harder this time. Chains clinked on the walls as if rattled by unseen hands. Pike's finger tightened on the trigger. "You're coming with us, Crawford. Dead or alive." The judge's smile widened. "Alive, Sheriff. I have not been alive for a long time." The lantern flame sputtered and went out. In the pitch-black darkness, screams erupted. One deputy was yanked into the shadows, his cry cut short with a wet snap. The prisoner wailed. Reverend Cole shouted prayers. Pike fired blindly, muzzle flashes lighting the corridor. For an instant, he saw them, long, skeletal hands clawing out of the dirt walls, dragging themselves free. Faces half-rotted, eyes glowing faintly, mouths opening in silent moans. The judge stood among them, untouched, his hands raised like a conductor guiding an orchestra of the damned. "This courthouse," he thundered, "is eternal. Its justice never ends." The walls shook violently. Bricks fell. A great crack split the ground, opening into a black pit that swallowed light itself. From it rose a sound that was not of this world, deep, hungry, and endless. Sheriff Pike grabbed Reverend Cole, pulling him toward the stairs. "Run!" The prisoner screamed as the skeletal hands dragged him into the pit. His cries were cut off with a sickening silence. Pike and the Reverend scrambled upward, lantern shattered, dust choking their lungs. Behind them, the courthouse groaned as though it were alive, wood and stone twisting in unnatural shapes. They burst into the courtroom above just as the floor split open, revealing the cavern below. The judge's laughter roared from the depths, shaking the rafters. Reverend Cole stumbled outside, collapsing in the dirt. Pike turned back one last time. Through the swirling dust, he saw Crawford standing in the pit, robes billowing as skeletal arms reached toward him in worship. The courthouse collapsed in on itself, burying the pit in a thunder of stone and timber. The judge's laughter faded into silence. When dawn came, only a smoking crater remained where Millfield's courthouse had stood. The town never rebuilt. Families left, fearing the cursed ground. Millfield became a ghost town, its name spoken only in whispers, its history a warning. And yet, some said that on quiet nights, if you stood near the ruins, you could hear the faint creak of a gavel striking wood, followed by muffled screams rising from beneath the earth. Balance scale the end of the Millfield Courthouse Murders. But the horror lives on in legend. Movie camera call to action for YouTube. If you enjoyed this chilling journey into the past, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with your friends who love dark history and horror stories. And of course, leave a comment below. What do you think really happened in Millfield?